This is Up Close. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. What happens when what was the domain of a relative few becomes far more popular? We're looking at that phenomenon in both literature and politics in this week's episode. First, the backroom dealings of the old way of doing politics were forced further out into the open, in part by a group of Jewish immigrants running Hollywood studios. How the film industry became involved in politics and what that did to our country's sense of democracy is explored by Purdue University's Kathryn Cramer Brownell in Showbiz Politics, Hollywood and American Politics. And then, for the University of Minnesota's Paula Rabinowitz, as for so many readers in the 20th century, whole worlds of literature suddenly became available with the development of cheap paperbacks. We talk about her book, American Pulp, How Paperbacks Brought Modernism to Main Street. But first, here's my interview with Kathryn Cramer Brownell. So I think it would come as no surprise to anybody today that there are a lot of Hollywood tactics in campaigning for office today, in politics today. Immense amounts of money spent on production and advertising and so forth. But what you suggest is that this is a development that was far from inevitable, that there was a time when both politics and Hollywood could have made different choices.
Absolutely. You see a change in 20th century politics over the course of about 60 years, from the 1920s really through the 1980s. And there's a shift from a political system that's dominated by parties, by urban machines, systems of patronage, backroom negotiations. If you wanted power, you went to the party boss and you were very loyal to your party. And then you have a shift over the course of the 20th century to our modern political system, which is dominated by the mass media. Entertainment is a very important part of how politicians reach voters, and they also construct themselves as celebrities to help gain political legitimacy and attention.
And what you had there at the time, in say the 20s and 30s, you had, this is very much old Hollywood, and you had these Jewish immigrants, these men, Jack Warner, you had Louis Mayer, and you had all these men who were immigrants and were trying to find their place in America. And being political was for them a way of showing, hey, we're one of you.
Absolutely. And that's actually why it was so controversial in many ways, because they were political outsiders. They were trying to assert their American identity, and they had skills in showmanship, in publicity, that was very popular with mass audiences. But the political and cultural elite were very threatened by that. And so there's this tension. It's based in class. It's based in, you know, this fear of immigrants having more power, and especially Jewish immigrants. And
the interplay, you know, among that as they're going is interesting in light of where we are in politics today, particularly regarding, say, campaign finance, where we live in this world of Citizens United and all this controversy over how much money can be spent by whom on politics. And it seems that there was pretty much a blank check from the studios in terms of political advocacy.
And what's really fascinating is that they do that on their own accord. They're doing that to gain favor. But it was a volunteerism that they wanted to show, we're behind you, and look at what we will do to generate all of this publicity for you, just to kind of gain this favor.
Right, and volunteer on the part of the studios, because for the stars, it was written into their contracts.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things about the studio system, is that studio executives could control so much of what their actors or actresses were able to do because of the morality contracts, where when they were in public, they were part of the property of the studios. So political activism by celebrities was very difficult and very controversial for some of these stars. If they did go out on a limb and advocate for political issues, it could come back and hurt them professionally.
And now, pulping literature with Paula Rabinowitz. What you're chronicling here is this period where literature became truly a mass medium, that anybody could buy it. You could pick up a paperback for, as it's repeatedly talked about, the cost of a pack of cigarettes. And what did that transformation do?
It really promoted a kind of new relationship to ideas in America, and that was actually a very democratizing procedure. And that it opened up the possibility for mass literacy. It also made possible new identities and new senses of selves, as some of these publishers were quite bold in publishing African American writers, gay and lesbian writers, various working class and young writers, people who were like 19 years old and so forth. And that they assumed that there was a large readership because the books came out in editions of the hundreds and 200s and 300,000s.
But back then, we had an idea that you make these works cheap, people will consume them. Mm-hmm. Do we still have that idea now?
Well, if you look at the mass, enormous numbers of books that are published every year, I would say yes. I mean, like 1 million titles are published a year in the United States. Not that they necessarily sell so well, but, and so yeah, I mean, I think people love books. It was an amazing technology that Gutenberg came up with that press, and it still remains an amazing technology. And the mass market paperback was a particularly amazing one because unlike that book, which is difficult to shove in your purse or your pocket, impossible for your pocket, you could stick them in your purse and pocket. And so they were about, I mean, and they still are, and you can drop them even in bathtubs filled with water, and yes, you can dry them out and they'll be wrinkly paper. You can use them, you can circulate them around, you can give them away. Or if like me, you can have your house completely filled with them. But yeah, I do think that books have a staying power.
And you talk about this idea that they were working literature on probably what you might say 3 levels. And on the one hand, you really had the pulpy stuff. You had the sex and violence books. And then on the other hand, you had books that maybe just wouldn't make it to mainstream publishers because of who the author was or what the subject matter was, whether they were minorities, whether they were gays and lesbians, whether the subject matter was about minorities or gays and lesbians. And then on the other hand, you had some of what are considered the real canonical works of Western literature pulped.
So it was about people having access to these things. Now, how were they going to have access to it was by, in a sense, making sure that the covers of those pulpy ones looked very similar to the covers of the Faulkner ones. So you thought you were maybe buying a bodice ripper of the swamp fever genre. That was a subgenre of the Southern sex novels, sex violence novels. And Faulkner's stuff looked just like it, so you liked that. Whether people actually finished and read these things, this I don't know, but it did produce this, what I call the demotics of reading. That is, that there was a kind of leveling off, that people were reading above and below their levels.
That's all for this week's abbreviated web episode of Up Close. A reminder, you can see the full episode of Up Close on the Jewish channel on cable, or listen to the full audio of the show as a podcast available on iTunes and your favorite podcast player. The Jewish channel is available on cable, Time Warner Cable Channel 1640, IOPTM Channel 505, RCN Channel 268, Cox Cable Channel 1, Bright House Channel 330, Verizon Fios Channel 900, and on Comcast on the on-demand menu on premium channels. For more information, visit tjctv.com.